Featherston Street Safety and Improvements Project update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. Glenn O'Connor, Transport and Development Manager. Just going to pick out a few points out of the report in front of us. At the 5th of June meeting, officers were directed to report back on the Featherston Street cycleway and the evaluation of the safety improvements. I do note that this has been a relatively small time period since then to evaluate some of the issues such as the safety issues, so please bear that in mind. So this is a November report. We're also due to report back in April 2025. A couple of the key points that I want to pick out is the travel time, and I'm just looking at page 278. The westbound queue time, pre-construction for vehicles, was about 241 seconds. The evaluation says it's roughly about 190 seconds post-construction, so a bit of gain there. Conversely, the next one down, the eastbound queue time, 142 seconds pre, 146 seconds post-construction, so a little bit longer. Traffic volumes, undeniably the sample that we use, the traffic volumes in the measured area have dropped. Certainly the medium and heavy vehicle sample has also dropped, so less medium and heavy vehicles go through Featherston since we've made the changes, and also traffic have decreased. Traffic speed, have decreased speed. We've got a second set of data, which is TomTom GPS data, and that told a slightly different story. That data told us that westbound traffic had increased by 20 seconds and eastbound traffic had increased by 14 seconds, so slightly different story there, but again, depending on the sample that the TomTom picked up. What that also did, the TomTom did suggest that the average speeds has also decreased through there, so that is some consistency. The bus service, what we found from the 2-week data capture is that the average patronage had more than doubled on the 4 bus stops, albeit there was quite a varied increase. The bus stop that we call Suzuki was 322 people used on that 2-week period. The previous period that we sampled, only 52 people, so quite a big increase there. Whereas others, and I'm just looking at the Woolworths bus stop, really didn't change too much. It had 183 at the start. When we monitored it was 198, so not that much change. Crashes, incidents, a very small time period for a sample to get any trends, so don't want to draw too many conclusions from this small sample. The final one I want to touch on before I hand over to Michael is market analysis. The spend, what did the changes to Featherston Street do to the spend? And I just want to just read a bit out of 4.7 that says the analysis indicates that the downturn in retail spending and transactions experienced within the Featherston Street area is largely consistent with, and in some cases better than, the contraction in retail spending observed across New Zealand and in Palmerston North. So for me, that was the key sentence in that report, and there's a lot more data, there's a lot more background in the report and also available behind that. But I'll hand over to Michael to discuss the community views.
Kia ora, Michael Bridge, Service Manager for Active Transport. We took on board 3 different sets of feedback. So we had have feedback from post-construction feedback from stakeholders and users of Featherston Street, and some of that was solicited by us. We reached out to the schools and the businesses and asked them for their comment, and some of the other feedback was provided directly to elected members and then passed on to us for inclusion in the report. We also carried out a intercept survey, hard copies of a survey out on the street, and where we spoke with people who were out using the street, motorists, bike riders, bus passengers and pedestrians. And we also had some people students from Palmy Boys High also complete the survey. We had over 130 provide their feedback in the survey, and that's a really good, strong data set. We also carried out an online survey, which, and Olivia can talk to it more if there's any particular questions, but it solicited a somewhat different response, from people outside the region as well as people from the city, and the data we've provided here in this report, but its currency, its value is not as strong as the hard surveys. But in essence, there was a mixture of feedback post-construction. The online survey was largely negative, but the hard copy survey, generally, there was a general recognition that it is a safer environment. Featherston Street is a safer environment for people walking and riding a bike.
Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'll start with a question. I'm not sure which one of you will answer it. In talking to a large retailer on Friday night at the Business Awards, actually the owners of Mitre 10, and I'm looking at page 282 and looking at that conclusion that you drew where you were talking about large retail being down. They had commented to me that their numbers were, the car park was down, the till was down, and the number of people in the shop had been down as a result of everything that had happened on Featherston Street. So when you say you talked to retailers on Featherston Street, had you talked to the owners of Mitre 10?
Oh yeah, I spent about an hour with Bevan and Andrew last week on site. So we talked through a number of the issues that they'd raised through their feedback. We were ostensibly looking at the issue around the Nata Street intersection, but we had a conversation around their turnover, and I explained that there was going to be a market view analysis that was going to be presented today, and it talked about the general view. What they said to me was that they acknowledged that their business is down, but that the business is down across the city and across the country. And I think I'm right in paraphrasing what they said, that they acknowledge that this is not exclusively a result of Featherston Street.
Okay. Anyway, okay, moving on to the next person, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, team. Just two questions from me. My first one's on page 278 regarding the bikers and pedestrian figures that you provide. Because you provided some quite, I feel, contradictory numbers here. So you've said that across the 4 count sites, this is 3.5b, there was a total of 29,458 pedestrians over 10 days measured. So that's an average of 2,900 pedestrians a day. You then say your highest peak day, there was only 1,103. So how can it be both? There's an average of almost 3,000 a day, but the highest that we counted was 1,000 a day. I just don't understand that.
So we've got the 10 measured weekdays. What I provided is a total for all 10 days. The average I provided is just for the weekday counts.
Thank you. So I did that maths. So let's assume that it was 6 weekdays and 4 weekend days, so the optimal number of weekend days. If all of those 6 weekdays had 1,103 pedestrians using it, which was the peak of your estimate, then each of those weekend days would have needed to have 5,710 people walking that road for the statistic you've provided to be correct. My question is, are you counting a person 4 times if they walked through those counting zones 4 times? Is that why we're seeing a skew in the figures?
There were 4 positions where we counted pedestrians and bike riders. So immediately around the Central Normal School crossing, and then just outside or between McDonald's and Woolworths. So two positions to the west of the intersection. And to the east of the intersection, we had a counter basically where Just Silch is, and then one over further towards where Suzuki is. So, and it was the cameras that counted each movement past in the cycleway and on the footpath. It is feasible that someone could have walked up and down and been on both sides of the footpath and been counted multiple times. But the rationale cameras so that, for example, we would be able to capture a high student who was being dropped off in the street and then crossed the crossing and then went into school, who wouldn't have been captured if we'd had just a camera at Just Silch, and vice versa. So it is possible that people would have been counted, an individual pedestrian would have been counted multiple times, but we don't have the tech, and we didn't have the people out. In fact, actually, people out there just wouldn't be able to recognise whether that person had been passed multiple times. That would, we just didn't have the resources out there to be able to make that distinction.
No, fair enough. And so, the last one I'll ask about this. So is that your view? Why your figures suggest there must have been 5 times as high pedestrian usage on the weekend to a weekday to get to that figure of 29,000? Is that what you think happened, or is there another explanation that we're not aware of?
I would have to perhaps look at more calculations. I mean, the calculations I have the data in front of me that was supplied by the contractor who carried out the count of the 4 different sites, and I can certainly provide those to councillors showing what the individual numbers for the individual count sites on the individual days. So that data is available, and also I guess the methodology for how we actually made the calculation, so that information can be made available.
Thank you, that'd be appreciated. And my last question is on page 346 regarding the online and on-site intercept survey results regarding the have your views of the redesign changed since construction is finished. I just want to understand this question. So let's say I had a positive view of Featherston Street before development and continued to have a positive view afterwards. Would it be reflected in the blue chunk of that square, neutral or no change? So my view remains unchanged as a result of the development. Is that where I'd be captured?
If you don't mind, I'd like to invite Olivia to respond to that question if she can.
Page 346.
346.
Thank you. The reason we asked this question was we wanted to be able to compare it to the information that we had captured prior to any work happening. We did want to specifically use the words before construction because we know that during construction people often have different views in there. So that's, I guess, the reason.
Of course, so I was just trying to clarify. Let's say I'd had a positive view of the street before and after. What would have I pushed in that survey? Would have I said my opinion hasn't changed, it still remains positive? Or would have I said, would I be reflected in the blue or the green chunk?
Yes, I would expect that you would have said neutral.
Okay.
We did get NZTA Wakakotahi's assistance on reviewing these to make sure they were consistent questions that are asked up and down the country. So.
And so that's true vice versa. If you had a negative opinion before and a negative opinion after, that would also be reflected in the blue chunk. No change of opinion.
Potentially, yes.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, team. Just a couple of things for me, please. On page 277, 3.3C, using your high traffic volumes, roughly 2,400 vehicles per day have changed the way they get to wherever they're going. Do you have any idea, if they hadn't, of what would have happened to wait times and how much more of a negative impact that would have had on retail spending? Were any studies done in the early days when the road first changed?
we didn't carry out any market view analysis pre-construction in terms of what the effect might have been if the vehicle volumes hadn't reduced. We haven't captured that analysis, no.
Okay, well, I guess they would have all increased. The other thing I'm interested in, you mentioned Mitre 10 and Nasa Street. What was happening there with Nasa Street, please?
Just the feedback around they've observed some of their freight vehicles tracking over the build-outs. So we've reduced the width of the throat, if you like, of the intersection to make it a shorter crossing distance for pedestrians, which Andrew and Bevan are both very supportive of. And we stood there and we watched truck movements and saw that some trucks went on the road and some trucks went over the concrete. So that's just a piece of analysis that we need to kind of
Thank you, and I talked about that in the early days in this chamber, about how trucks were now having to...
Question, councillor?
I guess I don't know, so thank you.
Councillor Dennison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in regard to those bike riders that Councillor Wood raised, would it be a possibility then, you mentioned that it's a highly likely possibility to get those sort of numbers, that even the 81 to 180 in the 3.5A, 81 to 118 bike riders could actually be inflated by 4 times if they were counted by each of those 4 cameras?
It was the same methodology, the same cameras. I guess the same, the same could be said for the different movements, whether a pedestrian was coming up Nata and into Boys High and a bike rider coming up Nata and into Boys High. The same count methodology was applied, yeah.
Just with the count methodology, having 29,000 pedestrians being suggested, which is like just under a third of our population walking or moving down that street over that period, what confidence do you have about the count of those 4 cameras to kind of give, some sort of rationale of accuracy?
The cameras were provided in place by our contractor, who's part of the design panel, by WSP. I don't know that we have any reason to lack any confidence in the technical side of the work that they've done, but we can certainly seek more information from them about the accuracy and the algorithms that I guess back up that software. But I personally, I'm very confident with the data that they provided, and I guess if I could add that the reason why we went down this process compared with what we did last year, where we had people on the street with clipboards, and felt that by having cameras on the street this time, we were able to have them out for a much longer period of time, 10 days, as opposed to 1 day or a few hours, and that we would be able to capture much more accurate data than someone with a clipboard.
Okay. And just with the business feedback, and one of the responses, I think, to the chair, just saying that the decline on their business, in that example, using Mitre 10, that it wasn't solely implied because of the vehicle traffic, but did they actually say there were some other contributing factors for the decline since that roadwork's been altered?
My conversation with Andrew and Bevan specifically, and again I paraphrase, but they did say that they acknowledge that business is down across the city and across the country. Absolutely.
What about the other range of businesses that have given feedback, or do you feel that you've got feedback from every business that's listed on that spreadsheet of large and being small business to kind of cover that off?
We approached every single business in the schools to provide feedback, yes.
And out of those, was there just when it says in the area of 15 merchants, can you give me an idea of how many actually did give feedback?
So you have all the feedback that we receive from all the businesses and the schools. Those that aren't included didn't provide any feedback.
Right. Okay, I'll leave the rest of a comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a few questions. The first one is that on page 202, where we've got data around change in spending and transactions for businesses, divided up into large and small, and they're all, slightly down, 4%, 4.7%, so on. Some of the businesses in their feedback stated that their business was down 25%. So what is your understanding of that? Is it possible that they, I don't know, how do we reconcile those two different pieces of information, I suppose, rather than me just guessing?
On it again. Thank you for the question, Councillor. The limitations of the market analysis was that it was taken over 1 month, so the month of September 2024 versus the month of September 2023. So the longer term experience of the individual businesses may in fact differ from that 1 month of data that we have.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. So at the time that you did the market data for September 2024, had construction finished at that point?
Yes, it had.
Yeah. Okay.
It finished in July.
Yeah. I'm just double checking. And then in terms of some of the feedback that we got from the fire service around the emergency vehicle access, can you comment on that, where they said that they felt that it was hard for cars to pull over because cars tend to pull left and they ended up having to go up the middle of the road?
We had some feedback not that long ago from FENS, and I met with them on site. I'll just find their letter.
So they commented that motorists were
Yep.
used to pulling left, and so that left them going up the centre of the road, whereas motorists can't get over the
Sure.
concrete hump, although they could in their truck, but motorists don't pull to the centre naturally.
I guess the conversation with Gary from Fire and Emergency Services was just looking at their experience, the feedback that they've got from their crews, but also I guess the trials and the work we did with FENS last year, and Gary acknowledged that fire trucks would be able to straddle the separators and use that clear way, which would otherwise, under pre-construction, have had parked cars there anyway. So, as it happens, when we were having the site meeting there, there was a fire in Rosslyn, and there were multiple emergency services vehicles travelling, police and fire trucks going up Featherston, and cars use the media strip, and we actually had some photographs taken in week of term 4, which shows a police vehicle with its sirens going along Featherston, and this was morning rush, and cars migrating into the median where it's available so that the police vehicle could get through. So in an absolute emergency, there is capacity for a fire truck to straddle the separators and get through, but it's not common, it's not intuitive. But both the police and the fire service acknowledge that they do a workaround, and it's not impossible for them to use Featherston Street, and they make that judgment on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, and so just my last question is, are there any lessons from this for future developments emerging at this point, or is it too soon to say? Do we need to wait for the, is it April, the next report back?
I think it's actually the later. Once we have April, we'll have a better data set across a whole range of bits and pieces.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions. One, Central Normal School indicated some concern still with the crossing in Featherston Street and kind of visibility there. Is there actions in place to respond to that?
I've had a number of conversations and exchanges with the principal at Central Normal School and had a site meeting there yesterday and another one last week. But that was focused on not sight lines, but actually the length of the stop sign. And so we're working through a solution to that because they have had 4 experiences where a car has gone around their stop sign when children have been crossing. So that's an issue, and the police are aware of that and are looking into that from an enforcement point of view. But we haven't had a detailed discussion around sight lines. We've been looking at the crossing issues for a priority for them.
Great, thank you. Wanted to ask as well, excuse me, some of the business feedback, I think kind of in that same stretch of road, was asking for the yellow hash marks to enable access to businesses. Do we have kind of scope to respond to those kind of things?
Yes, we do have scope to respond, and it is very much on a case-by-case basis. Those hatchings are typically reserved for emergency or high-profile, high-use, really critical issues. The more that we hatch a road, the more we reduce the stacking capacity, and so it is very much a case-by-case.
So in terms of the officers thinking at this stage, or what is that? Are we waiting for further information, further observations?
Yeah, we're waiting for further observations, further information and discussions ourselves. We haven't got a firm position as yet.
Right, great, thank you. And finally, you had indicated in some of the preliminary comments that you felt it was safer for pedestrians and for people on bikes. Do you feel that it's also safer, like admitted that it's early stage, but that it's also safer for people in cars, or is that something that's still uncertain?
To Glenn's point, really, we couldn't be definitive about that earlier than, say, a 12-month period of monitoring and evaluation, but certainly this initial that if there's one crash that is driver error, the motorist didn't see the motorcyclist coming, and that was only on the edge of the project site area, so we don't have any other reported crashes. Provisionally, we could say it's safer, but yeah, we have to get more data.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. Madam Chair.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a couple of questions left, I think. About the online survey, where you're saying that that's less reliable than the hard copy survey data, and you've already explained some of that, and thank you for the rationale set out. But you said it was reported in community social media pages that individuals could submit multiple online responses, and then in the post-construction feedback report, you talk about having changed the process to require contact details. Did you see any change in the responses after you required contact details that are supporting this lack of confidence in the online survey data?
There wasn't a significant change in what people were saying, but we had more than 1,000 people fill it in within the first 24 hours, and that was the point that we changed it. The reason I think we can allude to that number being so high is that typically when someone would see that on a social media page, they'll click and do it right then and there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And then my other question was about the FENS feedback. So I remember in one of the debates about Featherston Street, and there have been many, so forgive me for not knowing which one it was, there was a comment made that Fire and Emergency didn't use Featherston Street as a major route, but that doesn't seem to be what comes across in their feedback. So can you just explain for me what that is about?
I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, that certainly hasn't come from me, but I know that comment has been made in chambers in previous discussions. The Fire and Emergency and Police and St John's they make a call on whether Featherston Street is good for them to use, and they have their own information networks, and they make their calls accordingly, and they make astute judgments about the time of day, the week, the day, etc., and what else is going on. So they can use Featherston Street. They do sometimes use Featherston Street, but they also all acknowledge that Featherston Street can be congested and impassable, and in which case they find an alternative route.
I can probably add to that. When we first met with them, they explained that due to the location of some of their stations, they did prioritise Tremaine Ave, so it was more a case of a prioritisation of street rather than not using certain streets.
And in your discussions with them, are they now more likely to prioritise other streets than Featherston Street, and is that causing problems?
They haven't been specific, though I haven't asked that specific question, they haven't given that specific information, and they haven't said that it's not workable.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really wanted to test out these bike rider pedestrian counts again and just flip it, because understanding now that they could be counted 4 times.
Is this a different question?
Yeah, it
Councillor?
is. I just wanted to see the rationale. If I was to divide those figures by 4 and get some, as a scenario to work out the range that it could be as, instead of 3,362 cycle riders, it could be as little as 840 if they were all counted 4 times. And for the pedestrians,
So what's the question?
I'd really want to test out the range of cyclists we should be considering and pedestrians during that strip with the count, knowing the risk of them being inflated 4 times.
I guess what I can do is we can provide councillors with the data and the information on the numbers on each day of the week and the locations of the cameras, and if there are any follow-up questions, you can ask them there. I mean, I don't have the ability to be doing any maths.
Thank you, Michael. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to rejoin the queue. Just following up on that, is there anything that prevents a car from being counted more than once?
It depends where we put the cameras, but yes, it's the same. I mean, I guess we did test this out with the contractor. The questions were asked, and they basically, I guess their response to my question about that was consider it not as necessarily people consider it a trip. So if a pedestrian, for example, was to walk up one side of the street on Just Silch and then walk back on the other side of the street on Palmy Boys High side, that's maybe the same pedestrian, but they're making 2 trips on 2 pieces of infrastructure, so they're 2 legitimate. So they explain it to me as trips as opposed to people, and that's another way of looking at it. In the same way, a car might drive down one side of the street to go to Woolworths and then drive back on the other side of the street, and it's 1 car, but they would be counted twice, yes.
And in terms of the time frames of those counts, it could have been a round trip in the morning, a round trip in the afternoon. I popped out for lunch, went to see a mate at 4 o'clock. Like, we could count a car an infinite number of times in a day if they just kept using that piece of infrastructure.
This is true, and we did actually add to that, because we did actually put a car out there to be driving around and round and round to be doing some of the queue counts. So yes, we added to that congestion. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you for that clarification. Madam Chair.
Thank you. That's all the questions we've got. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So we'll look to move the recommendation that the committee receives the memorandum titled Featherston Street Safety Improvements Project Update dated the 20th of November. I'll move it, seconded by Councillor Wood. And we'll go into comment. What's wrong? Okay, any comment? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, really positive signs in this quite early review. Obviously, just the project but if there's a number of quite positive signs, still seeing good usage from all modes and seeing a good balance there, some early signs of better safety. I think for me, one of the primary things is we now have school zones that look and act and function like school zones, and school zones that also encourage people using feet and bikes and bus to get to the school gate occasionally, which is a good outcome for schools, especially when we think about what we heard this morning around parents and their desires, children's and their desires to have more agency in how they actually move around, especially near school. So I think that's a really nice outcome for us. Quite happy as well to see a few less heavy vehicles using this particular shortcut through the grid. The reality is this is a street that has significant place benefits, especially as school zones, and it's good that if heavy vehicles are going elsewhere or don't need to be there, that they're choosing to go elsewhere. Appreciate the partners as well that came this morning and took us through some of their perspective on benefits, and really appreciate their willingness to speak out during a time that at times has been quite a lot of toxicity going around, especially online, about how this project is going. So I did very much appreciate their willingness to bring that perspective to the table, and in future do look forward to this cycleway delivering more benefits as we have the opportunity and time to connect it up. At the moment, frankly, it is a bit of a stranded asset because it literally starts in the middle of nowhere, ends in the middle of nowhere, and we don't see the benefits until we actually get things linked up. So look forward to a future when Wellington is again investing in communities and investing in transporting communities, and we can see continued progress on the cycle network. A few months in, some good positive signs around this delivering better outcomes and a balanced transport system that works for everyone. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments are really around the counts used to show the benefits and having 4 sets of cameras and the risk of actually accepting those figures when actually if you're dividing them by 4 cameras, they could be as low as 840 bike riders during that 10-day period, and pedestrians more like 7,300. And this, I've got to put that in perspective because it's a little bit hard to believe that there's 29,000 people walk down that 900 metres of stretch, which is around a third of our population decided 10 days to go walk down there. And I just don't find that fathomable. And the cyclists, I'd think, instead of 80 to 110 a day, if you divided that by 4, you know, it could be as low as 20 to 30. And so without, just giving the broad range, and so the integrity of these figures, I think, are really at risk of having some credibility. The other thing I want to point out around the business feedback and around that there's other impacts, sure, but there's definitely an impact on small business, and I'd pick up perhaps from the Mitre 10 example without working out the other reasons why, some impact on business. And not all businesses fed back, because they fed back, bounced back to members like me and others around this table because they didn't have confidence in the good faith that their feedback would be taken any notice of and distributed or put up for any further consideration, because they felt like they were not represented well through the original consultation. And as far as business being down, that doesn't take into effect the rising costs of the environment either, of not only our rate increase, but other impacts of cost to business. And so why the net profit, net turnover was down, the feedback that's come through in one situation has been that the business profitability is down, and hence there's been staff let go. The Angkor hairdressing barbers closed down, and there were other examples of the impact to business. And that I wanted to represent here in debate, because I think it didn't kind of show that kind of impact otherwise. And so therefore, happy to hear everyone else out, but I just wanted to give some a stress test, I guess, on those cycle and pedestrian numbers, and a feedback for businesses that felt like they didn't want to put a voice into this feedback because they felt it was it wouldn't be taken notice of. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I read reports. I'm not going to relitigate the past and how we got here, but I do want to make it very clear that on page 346, the feedback is absolutely damning. No matter how we want to brush away the online survey, it said that 86% of respondents viewed the project negatively. Let's say it's 10% off. Let's say it's 20%. Let's say it's 30% off. That is still the vast majority of our community who are viewing it negatively. But even the on-site intercepts, over half view the project negatively. But more than that, of the 28% who viewed it neutrally or no change, obviously I think it would be a stretch to suggest every single one of those people thought the project was great before and continue to think it's great. There's probably a mix of people in there of both perspectives. But let's just say it was only half of those people that viewed it negatively before and continue to view it negatively. The feedback is overwhelming. Our community is not happy with the result of this project. And so I sit here feeling very vindicated that the councillors who said it was just a vocal minority in our community of toxically online people, even our on-site survey showed very clearly that the majority of our community are not impressed and view this project negatively. So I think it's important we highlight that at this point, because if we don't, it will go on with the view that, oh, well, just the online survey was very negative and those people didn't know what they were talking about. Even the on-site survey, it is overwhelming. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett. Sorry. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to take the opportunity to clarify that my point around the positive aspects of the project were about the positive function of the space for transport rather than about a popularity contest.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. I wasn't going to talk about the online survey, having asked questions about it, but I think I do take exception to 1,764 responses being categorised as the vast majority of our community. That maths doesn't seem to add up to me. But anyway, some concerns that do come through this for me are that ongoing conversation with our emergency services. You know, the feedback from police and FENS, I think that shows there's more work to be done there to help them understand how best to use the network or to seek their feedback. And Councillor Wood made a comment privately that we didn't see anything in there from St John's, and I think that is a gap in that feedback as well if we want to make sure that we're not putting people at risk by the changes that we've made. I think that's important. I was quite excited when Councillor Barrett said that there might be funding coming from Wellington. I thought we were going to get Wellington Council to fund it, but I think what he meant was the government. And yeah, not Wellington Council. I don't think they've got any spare money. So yeah, to be clear, there is a lack of government funding in this space. And if we want to do more to extend the safety improvements in our roading network, then we will have to work collaboratively with partners and hope that they get some money from somewhere. And I think that's where the impact of this type of project will be felt, is when we can have a joined up system. Stranded assets aren't going to get us there. On Councillor Dennison's point about the numbers, I mean, clearly he's not wrong. There are 4 cameras. But I did find the officer's description of the TRIP methodology as being quite compelling in this regard. There are no rules which say you can only go in one direction in one mode of transport in any one day. People use the network in very many ways. One of the benefits of our very compact central business district is that people pop here and there all the time. So you will find people doing multiple trips to run multiple errands. You'd expect to see that turning up in the data. I think that shows a rigour of the data collection rather than a flaw in it. So I'd be interested to see how that comes through in the April report. On the subject of feedback from businesses, I'm sure I was not the only one who's receiving many emails from many parts of our community. And from the officers' comments, I assume that, like I did, we all forwarded those into the central repository for receiving that information. So if business feedback isn't reflected in this report and elected members heard it, the fact that it's not in this report is to the elected member that heard it. We all had the opportunity to put that feedback into the report. It's unfortunate if we didn't take that up because somebody came to you with their feedback. And then I think my final comment about the impact on businesses is to say how people feel about things is absolutely valid. and people feel like business is hard at the moment, and they feel like we didn't help by digging up their entire street for months on end, and that is absolutely fair enough. But the data shows that there wasn't that significant a reduction from one year to the next. So undoubted disruption while the project was going on, but from a before and an after perspective, not that much difference based on the data that we've seen. And just to say, it's not as straightforward as going, this happened and as a result, this. You know, correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because two things happened doesn't mean that they're related to each other. And that's a really difficult topic to grapple with, and it's difficult to take our community on that journey. But that is the reality, that those two things don't necessarily go together. So it'd be interesting to see where this lands when we come back to it in April. I'm not surprised by any of this feedback, and certainly not surprised by the volume of online feedback. I saw some of that commentary at the time. It might be challenging, but it's good information to have about how our community feels about this. But feelings are not the same as the reality, and that's what we have to keep in mind as we go through this.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too think the stats speak volumes, and I'd just like to make the comment that, one shoe doesn't fit all, and I've seen it before, and there has to be some flexibility. And Nata Street might 10 with the street being narrowed, traffic calming, and trucks pretty much having to turn the opposite lane to get around the corner going towards Rangitikei. So I hope lessons can be learnt, and they are going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay. Oh, lost you. Here you go. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, there are stats, and there are stats, and there are heaps of lies. And sometimes it's very hard to tell the difference, isn't it? Lots of people in Palmerston North over the last few months have said to me over and over again, they go out of their way to stay away from Featherston Street. They won't do business in Featherston Street. They'll go anywhere else. They will not go down Featherston Street. It's been a dog's breakfast from the day it was looked at. It's still a dog's breakfast, and I think it will always be a dog's breakfast. And I'm going to finish with a quote, if you like, from page 315. I have witnessed emergency services stuck in traffic in Featherston Street with lights and sirens on. Their options to get around traffic is so limited, especially police cars, which are not high enough to straddle the cycleway. We heard earlier on that from the member of the staff that emergency services weren't having trouble, but here we have a business person from that area telling us they've witnessed it regularly. I'm afraid Featherston Street is still a dog's breakfast.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm hoping that I might actually pull this conversation back into some semblance of sensibility, really. I'm very thankful for the report that we received today. It's really a comprehensive examination over a very short period, 4 months, but it covers many facets of what we really need to be thinking about when we're talking about new projects in the city. And officers were actually really honest in saying that this is a 4-month period, and we really need to be a little bit cautious in terms of, I suppose, making any great predictions about the outcomes and the effects of what we've actually done. But in the interim, we've actually got, I think, some promising points, and I've made a list of those here. It would appear as though we've had reduced accidents. The speeds have been reduced traffic volumes, and there seems to be an increase in the uptake of public transport. And I think it would be fair to say that based upon the card data, which has been rigorously discussed, there appears to be minimal impacts in terms of financial cost to businesses. That is not to say that the period that it was in fact actually under survey might in fact actually not cover the reality for some of those businesses, but we need to be thinking where we are at this point in time in respect of this particular project. We will know more in April once we actually keep gathering data. And I found this report a warts and all recount of everything, in fact, about this particular project. Officers have been very, very upfront in terms of identifying those things that the community has in fact actually identified as still being problematical. And again, you know, I've made a list, you know, cycle detector loops, not particularly picking up every cyclist. And there's quite a few cyclists, Councillor Dennison. The left turn for buses, Featherston Street and Rangatiki Street is a problem for buses at the moment. There's some illegal parking. There are some parking concerns still for businesses. And officers have identified these and they are following those up in good faith and are solutions focused. I commend our officers for actually providing a warts and all account of where this project is at and of their willingness to carry out ongoing monitoring to make sure that we do get the best possible outcomes for our community. We as councillors need to lead, and we need to lead through objectivity, understanding the evidence and understanding the facts, not to be led by subjectivity. And that's what I hear often in this chamber, and it's disappointing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Well, a few comments. The first one is that I really appreciated the report. It's really good to have some stats. They're not going to be perfect, but they're more helpful to me in decision making than polarised opinion, which is all we've had up until this point. I would just say, though, to exercise a note of caution when looking at results of online surveys, because they can be manipulated really easily. So if multiple people put in survey responses, that can skew it. If people share it within their own particular groups, you can get some people exposed to the survey and others not. And I note that in this survey, 20% of respondents lived overseas, some in the USA, in Europe and so on. So I think we've just got to be a wee bit careful looking at results of online surveys and then drawing conclusions. And I think generally it might be a bit too soon to draw any conclusions from this. But I am interested in how this develops and in what lessons we can learn from this, both positive and negative, potentially, for future projects, and any potential tweaks that we might be able to do on this one to improve outcomes. But at the moment, I think it's a little soon to be definitive one way or the other, to say that you were right all along, or that you were wrong, or that you were somewhere in between. And just the final point I wanted to make is that I know personal experience that businesses are very badly affected when construction happens outside their door. So as an example, when I worked at the Vets in Terrace End and the construction was done on the roundabout there, business was down very significantly for the 6 months of that construction. So I think we're going to have to be very careful when we compare data. So if we're comparing data now with data during construction period, it might look as though things are better now. But in fact, they might actually be worse than they were perhaps 2 years ago. So we just have to be careful with the data points, that we're interpreting them correctly and understanding what was going on at the other point. So for instance, if we do data point from April and there was construction going on in April this year, I think it might be an unfair comparison to then say, oh, well, look how much better it is in April this year. Anyway, that aside, I think we need more of this objective reporting and a lot less rhetoric when Featherstone Street is concerned. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've found this report really useful for similar reasons to the previous two speakers. I think when there is such extreme views in the community, and I've certainly, as many of my colleagues obviously have too, have heard really valuable feedback from some very sensible people in our community, both really strongly against the changes and really strongly for the changes. So to have some objective data is actually really useful. I realise it's a short time frame and I'll look forward to the April report. But one graph that particularly stands out to me, and I do feel that it was really useful to have that on-site survey result. On page 345 at the bottom right-hand side, there's the question that was asked, the on-site survey results. The question that was asked was, compared to before construction, how would you rate your overall experience of safety? And I find it really intriguing that you've got about a third neutral, a bit over a third saying less safe, and just under a third saying safer. So, you know, if that is what we would presume to be fairly objective data, a third doesn't give us a really strong position one way or another at the moment, and I certainly wouldn't want to be in a position right now to make any definite decisions about the future of Featherstone Street, nor would I suggest that there's a strong enough case from where I'm sitting now to support continuing that project, but I'm happy to remain open-minded to that and to continue to see more objective data in April when that comes to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. The last one just disappeared on me. Thank you for all your comments, everybody. Just want to say one comment to the officers. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for answering all the questions that you were asked. And my one comment is that we are 90% funded by NZTA for this project, so a lot of this came from NZTA. So I will just now ask you all to vote. That is passed for 14 votes for and 1 against. Right. We are moving on to item number 18 on 351. Okay, David and James, you've got a presentation.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Madam Chair. James has got a presentation and has prepared the report and the draft parking framework, which he'll talk you through shortly. I just thought I'd make a couple of introductory comments. I'm aware there's been some material circulated to elected members for consideration, so just on that basis, I thought it'd just be useful to just provide a little bit of overarching comments before I hand to James to present the draft parking framework. I think just the first thing to acknowledge, I guess, is parking is a difficult issue for councils. Historically has been, not just here, across the country. You know, humans have internal contradictions, and I think if
we'd all love to be able to park immediately outside the place we're visiting for as long as we like for free. But when everybody does that and then we can't park there are tensions and challenges. So ultimately, you know, regulating and managing parking is about trying to resolve those tensions. It's been well over a decade since this council made any form of sort of direction setting process around the management of parking. It's a significant public asset. I guess as officers, we appreciate that there's a level of, and you know, bearing in mind the paper that you've just considered, appreciate there's almost a level of change fatigue potentially amongst you know, the community elected members and particularly around transport. So we're wary of that in terms of presenting this paper to you in the draft framework. We also acknowledge that, you know, transport and changes to the transport network, and again, it was talked about in the earlier paper, can have a big impact on businesses, and that's something we need to obviously clearly bear in mind as part of this work going forward. I guess to my earlier point that there's been no direction setting exercise for parking for well over a decade. That means that at the moment there's no transparent process for resolving those inherent tensions that exist in the community about how we manage parking as a public space. So when officers receive a number of inquiries on a week-to-week or day-to-day basis about changes to the parking framework, changes to the way in which parking is managed across the city, and the pressures are different in different parts of the city. At the moment, it's really left to those officers to resolve those tensions and challenges at the officer level. There has been decisions made through fees and charges at times to increase fees, but they've been quite sporadic and random. So I guess officers are also aware that there's, you know, increasingly divergent views occurring at a national, regional and local level regarding the management of transport, and we've just seen that again with the earlier paper. So, and the city's no different in that respect, and we're seeing that appear through a variety of forums. So the parking framework has attempted as best as possible to find a middle ground in that space. We don't feel that it's an anti-car framework. You know, reducing parking is not a high-level objective of the framework, but the efficient use of resources and almost more of a business case approach to the way in which we're managing parking is promoted in the framework. So we've delayed this work a number of times to try and accommodate those divergent views, but ultimately there's only so far officers can go to try and find a middle ground, and ultimately it's not our job always to find a middle ground, but to recommend a framework and recognising there are different views. So, but ultimately the approach that council wants to take to manage parking is a decision that's with the members, and the draft framework has been recommended for you as a starting point to consider. So on that basis, we'll just hand over to James, who's going to want to walk you through, some slides on the framework that's been.
Cool, thank you. So I will take the report mostly as read, and I want to use this presentation to talk a bit about the process and I guess the what is the draft that we're proposing for consultation. So
Can you click it on?
oh, there we go. So just to start off, the reasons for the framework. So first off, this was triggered as part of PNITI, and this is a project that out of that program. While I say that, it's not something unique to Palmerston North. There's a lot of other cities around New Zealand that have developed their own version of a parking framework, and the next step, the parking management plans. So why we want it? So it allows parking to be managed in alignment with our strategic goals. So we've got some strategic directions about what we want to achieve as council. As it stands now, we make kind of ad hoc decisions or on a case-by-case basis, and we can't really take the bigger picture. So the idea of the framework is to help us make that bigger picture decisions when it comes to requests that come through or thinking about changes we might want to make. it's also designed to provide a clear and consistent approach for making those decisions. So by a strategic document that links our parking management practice to our strategic objectives, it helps provide a clearer view for our community what we're trying to achieve. So if there's a change in condition, well, we can refer to why we've made that decision using the parking framework to help us justify that decision. And finally, as David talked about, it allows for integration with other transport decisions. And so the best way to represent, slides slightly out of order just with these first two, but I'll point to this example. So in Queenstown in 2017, the city centre parking was at capacity. And what that resulted in is obviously people struggling to get a car park, added, well, 30% of congestion within the city centre. So by taking an integrated approach, Lakes District Council made changes to how they price their parking, as well as some of the, I guess, discounts they offered, while at the same time Otago Regional Council lowered bus fares. What happened was there was a decrease in the parking demand from the peak time at 1 p.m, which was sitting nearly at 100% utilisation, and it drops down to 79%. So that, well, in a couple of years it dropped down to 79%, which means that those parks are still mainly being used, but there's enough parks there that people aren't driving around struggling to find a car park. At the same time, you also had an increase in the bus patronage in the network, and that's continued to grow since 2017. There was an article not too long ago that indicated that in 2024, August, they'd hit 1.9 million passenger trips. So the network has continued to grow. This is what when we talk about integration, it's about linking up those decisions to make sure that there's multiple levers that can be pushed and pulled when talking about supply and demand parking. And so when you pull these at the right time, you can get positive results, like providing more capacity in your parking network when it's over capacity, as well as increasing utilisation of the bus network. So just jumping back, so developing the framework. So this did start in 2021 and started with some initial workshops with the elected members. There was some stakeholder engagement, and then unfortunately there was some delays due to resourcing. We recommenced work in 2023, further workshops, further stakeholders. There was some further delays around the timing, especially around the LTP. And so throughout that process, we've made alterations, and we're probably sitting on the version 6 of the proposed drafts. We've been taking on feedback and trying to tweak it and get the best outcome. So in terms of the framework, the inputs we've gone into it, so we've drawn on national guidance, international best practice. We've drawn on examples from other cities. So we've got a picture of Nelson's parking strategy. We've reviewed council strategic goals and plans to try and ensure it's as best as possible aligned with those. We've done engagement with the elected members and various stakeholders, and we've also looked at some of the parking challenges. And so that smaller image there is taken from the city centre business case, and that's an analysis of utilisation of parking within the CBD, looking at the frog sensors. So you can see some areas where there's higher utilisation, other areas that's lower, and that will change throughout the day as well. So I wanted to provide this example because this is always an issue that comes up around parking, and that's should parking be free? And so this is, I guess, part of the reason why we need a framework, because we need to, I guess, understand what we're trying to achieve in managing parking to help us make those decisions. Because Hastings did a trial of free parking, and they found that there were some I guess, inconclusive results about the positive impact on retail, and looking at news reports, there was both positive and negative reviews coming from the business sector. But then it was ultimately what it came down to was a discussion about who pays for that parking. Is it being paid for by the ratepayers or is it being paid by the user? And so taking more strategic approach around parking management can help to, I guess, outline clearly upfront where our priorities sit behind that. Yeah. Cool. So in terms to talk about the outline of this part work, so what we've tried to achieve through this draft parking framework is to ensure appropriate supply now and into the future. So what that means is thinking about the existing car parking supply and how it's utilised, where are the pinch points and how do we alleviate those pinch points, and being flexible to try out different approaches to that. We're seeking to align parking management practices with council goals, and then we also aim to improve the utilisation demands of that utilisation and supply and those other pressures, like land that's being used for parking is also land that we can't use for developments, whether it's commercial or residential. So finding that balancing act between allowing land for development while still providing for supply. And so I might use, I think this is my final example, Tuka Puia car park in Auckland. So it was opened in 2020. It was cost $35 million to build, has 420 car parks, which equates to about $83,000 per car park. So not a small amount. So what's unclear is those ongoing maintenance and operational costs. So conversations in the early days I had with Plaza indicated there's costs when people break your ticketing machine or drive into the arm that stops you from driving through the car park. So that's a few $1,000s that every time someone drives into it that is an unexpected cost. The information I was provided is that currently utilisation of that parking building is quite low, which means that a lot of those costs are being borne by the ratepayers rather than the users, which is generally, when you build these buildings, the hope is that the user pays. So it's something to be mindful. And the reason I bring up this example is because it's this point that I'm trying to make about utilisation. It's what we're trying to kind of highlight in this draft framework is that we want to better utilise what we got before we start thinking about building additional supply. That's not to say, no, we can't build additional supply, but let's monitor what we've got, let's evaluate it, and let's better utilise it, and before we move on to potentially costly interventions. So, final slide, framework content. So, I think the key thing is this is a proposed draft that we're seeking to consult on. So, we want to get the community's feedback to see if we've got it right. And so these are the proposed objectives and proposed principles, and that's been built over quite a few years now from elected member input, from stakeholder input, and we believe it reflects those views, but also reflects kind of what the council wants to achieve in terms of its goals and ambitions for the city. I'll leave it there, and happy to take questions.
Thank you. Just a first question from me, James. Consultation, how are you going to go out for consultation?
I might invite Liv to help answer that question. So we haven't done detailed planning at this stage, but the intention is to develop that more with us going out potentially early next year. We want to try and get our timing right to not clash with other consultation going out.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Okay, a few questions from me. So the parking management framework is part of the PNITI kind of overview. So if we were to adopt a radically different parking management framework, could that potentially influence funding for the Ring Road and other Whakatutahi co-funding for projects?
A bit of a tricky question to answer. So P90I is a program. It's looked at, I guess, using the word integration again, thinking about what we don't want and what we do want within our transport network, and trying to balance those and integrate decisions to work together. So whether or not it would affect Wakatahi's decision to co-fund, whether we... Sorry.
Sorry, James.
Right, just, it is a good question, Councillor Johnson. I think what I would encourage elected members to think about is, you know, we're seeing, as I said in my introductory comments, we're seeing some really increasingly divergent views about how transport should be managed at a national, regional and local level. What my advice to council would be, or is that Pinity was developed as an integrated transport solution for Palmerston North. And I think if we continually chase what the government of the day is suggesting is a good idea or a bad idea, over the last decade or so is that will change. But Pinity had an eye to that and was seen as a future-proof solution for Palmerston North across a variety of transport programs, from parking through to the ring road. So Pinity sees the management of parking as a critical aspect to developing a logical transport network for Palmerston North. So in short, my answer is I think it is an important part of Pinity, but trying to couple it to government direction and funding is proving increasingly challenging, I think.
Okay. Is this framework a package, or what scope is there for making any changes to it at this point from an elected member perspective? So is it like an accept all or reject all, or is the potential for amendment here?
Oh, I think any document that officers prepare, there's always scope for adjustments and change. I think it's the extent of those and the content of those that would influence officer advice. So it's a hard question to answer in a generic sense, but certainly the framework's been put together as a single document.
Okay, so I'll be clearer then. So a communication from an elected member during the week suggested that other elected members would not be able to make any amendments today. Is that true?
Governance has rethought their plan, and you are, of course, welcome to make amendments to any motion that's put forward.
Thank you for confirming. And then just a specific question about one particular aspect of the plan. So there's a suggestion here that the phase out of residential permits would be advised in the plan. How is this going to help, I guess, people who we want to live, we're encouraging people to live in more medium dense kind of locations that might not have on-site parking. We're encouraging people, it's our strategy to get more people to live in the CBD. If we're not providing resident permits anymore, what's the solution for those people if they have a car?
This is probably a bit of a complex one, but the thing to, I guess, keep in mind is we put in parking restrictions, and so specifically the residential parking permits are designed to allow people to ignore time restrictions. The time restrictions are put in place to achieve a certain outcome. So by not having restrictions, you're saying that anyone can park there for as long as they want. If you're putting in time restrictions, you generally want people to come and go. And so that's generally, you're trying to encourage turnover. The point of contention is that the residential parking permits allow certain people to ignore those time limits. So it kind of defeats the purpose of having a time restriction in the first place. And so I guess the example I might point to is currently there's some multi-storey apartments being developed on Lynton Street. There's some timed parking along there that I imagine will be quite well utilised by some of the businesses along there. once those apartments get built, the residents there would be entitled to access a residential parking permit because it's timed parking limits in front of their house. It means that if people then buy those apartments knowing the decision that the apartments doesn't have a car parking available and that they have a car that they need to find parking for, it then kind of puts the emphasis on council to provide their private car parking. So it's a hard one to reconcile, and I guess the main reason we made that recommendation is because the residential parking permits undermine the point of putting time restrictions. So that's.
I think it's a really good answer, James, and I think just to add to that, to help elected members sort of understand why that's been added. So and I talked earlier about how officers are dealing with inquiries on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. So we've had somebody with a residential parking permit parking outside a cafe 24/7, and that cafe owner expects a level of turnover. And the other thing is if we're looking to encourage inner city living, which we are, we want more apartments, we want more inner city living. We also want to send a signal to those who are investing in developing in that type of accommodation that if they think a large number of the people that are going to purchase or rent their investments have a car park, then they're going to be incentivized to think about whether or not they should incorporate on-site car parking at their cost, not the public cost, as part of their development. So I think it's a really good example that highlights the tensions and trade-offs about how we manage public space and what signals we want to send to investment and how that plays out.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks both for the report. In the report, you set out kind of the very long process that it's taken to get to this point. So I suppose my question is, having taken that long to get here, how confident do you feel that the various voices that you've gathered into this process are reflected in this report now? So you talked about the elected member workshops, the stakeholder workshops, that wider discussion. What's your level of confidence that where we are now reflects all of those inputs?
I guess my commentary around this would be, similar to parking in general. You can't give everyone what they want. I think that what we've presented in front of you strikes the balance of the different views and opinions that we've heard, and that has been the aim, is trying to find that balance in terms of drafting that.
Okay, and at the back of your document, there's a strategic context list, which would strike fear into the heart of anybody who has to read that kind of thing. A list of policies, national and local. Why have you put that in there? Why is that important?
So there's a lot of work, and it was actually my predecessor and his early work during this that did a lot of that legwork behind that. It was really just trying to think about, well, what are we trying to achieve in managing it, and trying to link that to some of the various strategies. I would say more important is probably the local strategies. What does this council want to achieve in terms of its transport network, and what implications does that have for parking?
I think if I could just briefly add to that, I think the intent of that list too highlights that while we have a suggestion, we have a parking framework, ultimately we're here to plan and develop a city, not plan and develop car parks. So the relationship between that list indicates that, the way we manage parking has an influence on a whole range of activities of council. So we do silo and break up the city into bits, but ultimately we're here planning a city, not planning car parks.
Thank you, David. That's a good answer. That was the last one. David, you said in your preamble, this is not an anti-car parking framework. but the document does says its goal is to promote sustainable transportation. Doesn't that mean you want us all on bikes?
The short answer to that is no. Sustainable transport, promoting sustainable transport is purely about balancing the supply and demand. And I'll just point to the example of Queenstown. There's opportunities in leveraging those other modes to reduce the demand pressures on parking. So that's kind of where that comes from.
I think another way, just adding to that is nowhere in the document that the officers have drafted does it indicate that we're going to increase or decrease the supply of car parks in a particular area. Increasing car parks in a particular area could be an outcome that's a result of this framework as drafted by officers. Decreasing car parks in the area could be an outcome of this framework. What we're talking about is the efficient use of that resource on a case-by-case basis developed up through those management plans. So, yeah, and I guess that's why we're saying it's not as I described simply, it's not an anti-car thing. It's about, yeah, as James has described well, sustainable transport.
So just to follow up on that, if we decouple parking from other modes of transport in this framework, what would be the impact of that?
I guess what we're trying to do with the framework is, and I've used the word supply and demand a couple of times, decoupling it from thinking about the other modes. You're losing a bit of that integration with the wider transport network, and you probably push the focus a bit more towards supply, which limits the amount of kind of, I guess, the direction about the potential interventions or solutions to some problems that you might be having.
Okay, thanks both. Thanks for your answers. Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, gentlemen. Just interested in the principles, and in particular, the principle that says parking management is integrated with the wider transport system. Just wanted to know why that principle is there and why it's there as a principle.
I think that principle is there to reflect, I guess, the comments previously made and the questions I've previously answered. It's really about balancing the supply and demand. It's thinking about all the potential ways to address parking challenges within the city and allow us to, I guess, make smart decisions about addressing some of the challenges that we have in the city.
Thanks. Just going to understand where this framework kind of sits within the overall hierarchy of other things. I'm thinking things like the transport plan that's in the long-term plan.
So this kind of where it sits is ultimately under like the long-term plans. It's designed to be a linking document effectively to what council wants to achieve in terms of its long-term plan for the city, and linking that to the on-the-ground decisions. So it's to
If I could just help you out there, James, a little bit. I mean, ultimately, at the highest level, we've got this city vision and goals. Then we've got the city strategy. We have the plans, which signal outcomes, but they also signal, almost like a to-do list for the council. But I think this document sits alongside that document at that level within the organisation. So we've got a range of plans, policies, frameworks. I think all of those sit at what I'd probably call the third level of that hierarchy, from vision goals at the top, the city strategy, and then a series of plans, policies, and frameworks that then provide more meat on the bones for operational decisions.
And if we end up in a situation where there's quite significant tension between things at that third level, how does that end up getting resolved?
Well, that's a case of looking up, and I think that's what we think, our advice is we feel that's what this document has taken direction from. So we've got 4 goals. We don't just have a goal around transport. We have a goal around, you know what the goals are. We've got goals around climate change, sustainability, creative, exciting business. So it's looked up. and the intent is that it provides a bit more direction in terms of looking down.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both. Just my question is on page 358 in the attachment. It's about the third or fourth paragraph down under the what is a parking framework and why do we need one? It says at the end of that paragraph, it talks about the parking framework. It says it providing our community with increased travel choices, and I'm just wondering how a parking framework provides the community with increased travel choices. Because I thought we had those choices already. The last.
Yeah. So. So it's just about making sure that parking choice is integrated and that we're providing balance throughout the network to enable other modes as well as providing sufficient parking supply. And so recognising that there's going to be tensions, and I'll refer to the latest sections where you've got the reference for the hierarchy for managing parking, where it's, if you think about space allocated for a bus versus providing that for a car park, it's about trying to find that balance to ensure that you can provide the infrastructure to support those networks like the bus stops.
So I understand you correctly to say that if you lose some car parks and put in a bus stop, then that will provide an increased travel choice because you can use the bus? Sorry, I didn't quite. I'm trying to understand what the increased travel choices are that this parking framework would provide that we don't have already, because we do have the choice to bike and walk and or catch the bus at the moment, I thought. So I'm just trying to understand what the of suggesting that this would increase choices.
So a very practical example of that is, so we have a number of staff and elected members that occasionally have to go down and visit the regional council. When you travel down to the regional council at the moment, if it's pouring down with rain and you need to take your vehicle, it's very difficult to find a car park. That's because there's limited control of parking in that space, which is in that part of the city, which is a growing sort of office area. If we were to introduce a parking regime to that area, so I know, for instance, there are a number of staff that work in and around that area that park on the street for 2 hours and then go outside and move their car every 2 hours. So if you increase a parking management regime that encourages greater turnover in that area, or possibly introduce, it's a mini CBD environment, there may be paid parking might be an option in that area. You encourage turnover, so when it's raining, if you have to hop in your car and you go down, you're more likely to catch. So there's very high occupancy of car parks in that area. So what we're saying is it's there's a whole lot of interventions that we can take that will ultimately increase choice. Obviously, if it's not raining, we'd encourage staff to walk or cycle down, given that distance of trip.
Yeah, okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just in response to Councillor Naylor's question there, would it be helpful perhaps just to reiterate the Queenstown experience? Perhaps that might provide, would that provide the answer to what she was querying as well? By manipulating, don't worry.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, so just a couple of questions about the, what are we calling it?
Oh, we're not up to that yet? Is that what you want to?
No, but I have got questions about it, because once it's put up, we'll be out of question time. So, as you're aware, Councillor Wood and Councillor Harpeter circulated an alternative parking framework, and I just wondered if you had any comments on it. For the rest of us, who will undoubtedly have to make a decision whether to adopt it or not.
bear with me one moment. Just making sure I've got a copy of it unless if there's specific questions.
Specifically, I see that all of the strategic context has been crossed out at the end, but there might be other things.
Yeah, look, my general comment is the same as my introductory comments. There are, we're seeing at a national, regional and local level that there are increasingly divergent views about the way in which transport decisions should be managed. Ultimately, those decisions sit with elected members. We have prepared a draft framework that we think gives effect to council direction achieved through previous processes, alongside the other conversations and other documents, that list that Councillor Bowen asked about earlier. So I think ultimately that's a decision for elected members to consider. I mean, I guess one point, a more specific point I would make is, again, it's something I said earlier, is the framework we drafted didn't predicate a particular outcome in any particular area to either increase or decrease car parking. So there has been a statement added to the purpose, which is to increase parking availability. So the assumption is the solution would be to increase parking. We're not saying in the framework that the officers have drafted the solution would always be to increase parking. There'd be a whole lot of other mechanisms you can look at. So, and then I think later on talks about the reducing the loss of parking. Again, we haven't assumed, we're talking about the efficient use of parking resources based on, and the scenario for Broadway will be different to the scenario to Airport, which will be different to the scenario to TRCN, which will be different to the scenario to the Plaza. So we haven't predicted outcomes that would result in increase or decrease of parking.
Is it significant that all of those policies, strategies and plans are crossed out? I don't, is it because the amended version doesn't align with any of those plans? I'm not understanding really that aspect of it. Okay, so officers weren't involved at all in advising about these changes to the plan?
No, we weren't. But again, I reiterate that as officers, we appreciate there are different views about the way these resources should be managed, and those are for elected members to determine. But obviously, we stand by the advice that we've drafted and the framework that we've prepared.
Thank you.
So I'll just get the councillor to respond to your question, councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a good question, Councillor Johnson. I'd anticipated we'd get this one. My understanding of the process was we were going to put it sort of like a notice of motion, then do questions on it after that, so I'm sorry we have gone a bit of a different way. The reason that that's all been crossed out is because I haven't gone through every single one of those documents and determined whether this version aligns or doesn't align with them. I'm quite confident that this version will align with a significant amount of them, given it's probably 85% the same as what the officers recommended, but rather than trying to go through and determine exactly which ones it does and doesn't align with, it was more practical just to remove that reference, as obviously everything we do exists in the strategic context in which we find ourselves.
Councillor Bowen.
I'm a bit confused on process here, Madam Chair, because I do have questions about Councillor Wood's policy statement, but I think they're questions about council policy, so I need to ask the officers about it.
I know, that's why I keep asking governance, what are we doing? So I'm trying to get that direction.
Just if I can assist, we're happy to answer any questions in relation to policy implications.
Do we move the recommendation?
So can I ask?
I'm sorry, I'm just going to have a... Are there any more questions? Are there any more questions that aren't related to... On the officers? Anything else? Not including the one that Councillor Woods circulated. Are there any more questions? I did ask that. Is there any more questions on the officer's report? There'll be an opportunity to ask questions. Yes, Councillor.
I'm seeking guidance from governance here. Does the motion have to be put before anybody could move a procedural motion? I don't see that instruction in. So on that basis, on my understanding of standing orders, I'd like to move procedural motion that this go back to, that's lie on the table pending a workshop. I think this is way too complicated to be doing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we've already had a number of elected member workshops on this. We've had stakeholder workshops. There's significant interest in getting this right.
Councillor, point of order, you don't need to talk through.
I'm allowed to speak to it because that's the standing order. I can explain why I'm moving the procedural motion. It's 4 o'clock at the end of a very long day. I'll be wanting to ask questions about every single one of those amendments in the draft document. So, colleagues, if you don't want to be here till at least 5, I'd suggest we go for the procedural motion, and I'd like to put that seconded by Councillor Johnson. Thank you. Oh. We'll be here forever.
Yeah.
I've got real questions.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Sorry, you're not allowed to instruct next on procedural.
I don't believe we're allowed to be on procedural motion. That's my point of order.
We're going to vote on the procedural motion.
It's got a point of order.
We're not allowed to. Remember, there is no matter under debate. Nothing's been moved or seconded. Procedural motion only been moved. I haven't spoken in the debate to move it.
The secret motion's been moved, Trustee Foot.
Let's just have 5 minutes, everyone, just 5 minutes. Can we just have 5 minutes, everyone?
Sure. Totally. That's why I asked the question.
Because at that point it will be 4:10 and we'll be
I did ask the question.
further down the track.
Well, that's why I asked it, but they couldn't answer it. But the minute they move it, I'll move a procedural motion. So it doesn't make much difference. It doesn't make much difference, really, because the minute you move it, I'll move a procedural motion. Well,
No.
that's right. Yeah, it just delays the
Yeah.
Then they can.
What are we going to achieve? We've already had 3 workshops on this. What are we going to achieve by going back to another workshop? See what we set up the same.
It's just timing. Look, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and this is going to take a long time. We've still got 4 items on the agenda. I mean, you and the chair decided to put this at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so I think this is.
What William was saying,
It doesn't need to be a big workshop, but
It's a debate not until
we hadn't gone into
I'd rather read good decisions based on proper information than William scrapping all of our strategic alignment. That seems ridiculous.
yeah.
Well, it's
That is it.
to cross out all of our policies because he doesn't know
We
which
don't
ones
have to
apply.
move the motion first before then we can move.
Can you put the second one as Councillor Johnson? They both like a good support here today, so that's really good. That's really good. And then David Naked. Sorry, I'm feeling really good. 5 minutes. by Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson, yes. Councillor Arnott, you're not in the queue.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I think I've misinterpreted the standing order, so I don't think I'm allowed to speak.
Okay. You're not allowed to speak. Right, okay, we are now just going to a vote. Councillor Arnott, I'm taking you out because no one else is allowed to speak to this. We are now just going straight to vote. Lie it on the table.
Yes. Oh, I voted the wrong way. No.
Let's pass 11 votes to 3. Okay. So, next item. We'll now move to item number 19, which is the annual summary of economic impact and benefit of council-supported events with Luke. Page 381.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, it's pretty brief. I'll take the report as mainly read. It is quite a brief report. It is a starting point for us and our team to continue the journey for both grant funding accountability and to telling the story of the economic impact of events within the city. So yeah, with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Luke. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for taking this as mainly read, Luke. I mainly read most of it. I suppose my question is, you focused in on this report on major events and haven't included in that other events with economic impact. What's the rationale there?
The primary rationale for that is the around my confidence in the data. At this stage, we have full control over the data within the Major Event Fund granting our grants program, so we can use that with the tool that we have to generate accurate results. The next step in the journey is to try and get some of that good data out of other events, and that is definitely the intent going forward.
So we'd requested this as an annual report, so next year, which other types of events would you anticipate being brought into this reporting?
That's definitely open for discussion, but we have a pretty straightforward set of metrics now that we can request from event producers, both on the scoping end and the post-event reporting end. So as the event producers have that list of information that we require before the event takes place, we're able to generate these reports. So the intent is that some of this reporting goes out to some of the other funding pools, things like the Community-Led Initiatives Fund, Arts Event Fund, and the Sponsorship Fund, as it suits.
And Sports Events Partnership Fund?
And Sports Event Partnership Fund. So this is this model is with Sport Manawatu, and they are working towards getting this information out of the larger events as well.
And I like the net regional benefit figure. Is it, now we've got that rather than the gross figure, would it be part of our process going forward to be targeting a certain amount of net regional benefit, or is this just for information?
At this stage, it's just for information. It's currently not built into the assessment process, but we are looking at how it can and giving some advice to assessors around appropriateness of say, percentage, either that council is funding or percentage of of investment returns to the region, things like that. So there is still a bit of work on the assessment end, but this model definitely gives us scope to do that.
Okay, and last question. In those, like the major events you've got there, when you're assessing the benefit, gross or net, do you do any assessment of kind of where that flow on that benefit lands? So if it's in other things that we might also be reporting, for example, the example in the summer was the Six Extinctions exhibition at Te Manawa reported their economic impact, and the suggestion was that some of that was flow on from things like stock cars. So how would we see that flow in this kind of reporting, or is that too hard?
It is quite difficult. There is a comment in the report around comparing with the likes of the market view data, and you can draw some conclusions from that, but it would be quite difficult to be really explicit around some of those flow-on effects.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Luke. Just looking at the gross benefit, net benefit tables, I'm not really very clear about the difference, even though I have read it a few times. Are we saying that the net benefit is a better indicator of regional economic benefit?
Yeah, it is quite difficult to sum it down into the report. But I was expecting questions. So the net benefit is the total benefit of the event to the region less the cost of it. So if you use, say, the Davis Cup as an example, you'll see a really high gross, but quite, when you compare it, quite a low net. It's because there's quite a lot of external cost to that, bringing people in, the hireage of equipment coming in, but the local cost to the benefit to the region is around the spend and the hospitality and things like that.
Right, so that's the total cost of the event.
Correct.
Versus the money it brings in.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. So on that basis, could you work out a kind of a hierarchy of benefit, if you know what I mean, a proportion of, how would you determine? So although the actual figure is high for central field days, for example, the cost is also high. So would you, if you were trying to sort of say, well, which of these is a better event for us to fund, which is where we're thinking, I suppose, could you use some kind of ratio to determine one was better than another, or is that not helpful?
That's definitely in consideration for how we move forward with this kind of reporting for the assessment end of Major Event Fund, as well as for events that we've proposed multi-year funding. Okay. So some of this data from this report would flow forward into the next year, and it would have a ranking effect. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I understand that our CCOs, one that come to me was the Six Extinction exhibition, which done through Event Insight, which is different from the company we're using for these other major event funding assessments. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So is there a chance to align the other CCOs when they're doing this work so we actually can get some consistency with the information? Because that was the first, or I guess, and that is my question.
It's definitely an intent, and we would encourage any CCOs to have that discussion directly with us, because it's a tool that Council has invested in to make these assessments. This tool is about the raw data out of it. What it doesn't generate is a full impact assessment report, and that's where Event Insight come into it. So this gives me figures. What Event Insight do is they take figures from a slightly different model and they tell a bit of a wider story.
Just for the integrity of the data, what this one was, and what I interpreted from the Te Manawa one, was that they were calculating for every man, woman and child a daily spend, whether they stayed the night or were just a day visitor. Does this one here, the matrix that we're using for this, differentiate a child in the numbers and the calculations of benefit?
this model does provide the ability to segment out the visitors more. It does require some very in-depth surveying at the time of data collection. My gut feeling is that would be quite difficult to segment out, but it is definitely within the model's scope to be able to do it if you had good data collection methodology.
Okay. And last question, Madam Chair, just in regards to how they've worked out how many days they've stayed or how many nights they've stayed, I just wanted to see, because in the Te Manawa one, they come back with an average night stay of 3.82 to come see an exhibition, but yet they've got narratives saying they come for Teams Champs and all these other events. How do we differentiate the benefit or the allocation of just say 3.5 hours doesn't mean that event created activity? How do you differentiate? How do you make that count a bit more than?
Yeah, again, it's in that data collection. So a couple of these we had quite in-depth surveying, and we were asking questions like that. So how many nights did you stay? Were you there for other events? Things like that. It gets quite difficult to collect that data because just asking attendees to fill out a 20-minute survey gets quite cumbersome. So it's that balance between asking the best questions you can get out of people and without reducing your sample size so much that it means you're not going to get good data. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Luke. Just looking at the net benefit on page 383, who are the beneficiaries of that net benefit? Is it just the business owners?
The way the model works is it's calculated out as a regional net benefit. It doesn't differentiate where the benefit goes, but it makes assumptions around that benefit as being realised within region, either through hospitality providers, the accommodation sector, and associated services. But yeah, it doesn't make that distinction as such.
So, players who are not business owners, do they benefit in any way?
When looking at purely economic return, there's a lot of ways you can look at wider benefit, whether that be if you bring in a big event like this that council has invested in, that means that other areas improve infrastructure, things like that. So we've heard of hotels being upgraded because of a large event coming in. So that means that if they're family visits, it'll have better local amenity, things like hospitality venues and things are going to be open longer, have bigger offering. It's quite hard to drill down into that kind of further than pure economic numbers when you're looking at that kind of benefit for the city.
Okay, thank you.
The Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Tēnā koe, Luke. Luke, just a query, and I might be wrong with thinking this, but does volleyball, basketball, badminton, those national shows, Lego, do they qualify for this?
At present, just this year's report, it is only the events that are directly funded through the major event fund pool, just that one funding pot. The intent is that other events that are funded by council, like those ones that get sports event partnership funding, they would fall into the same model, and we'd make that, we'd request that Sport Manawa to include that as part of their funding conditions as well.
Oh, thank you very much. Kia ora, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Luke. That's all the questions I've got. Thank you very much for your hard work. So I'll look to move this recommendation that the council receive the memo titled The Annual Economic Impact and Benefit of Council Supported Events dated the 20th of November. I'll move it, seconded by Councillor Wood. Just want to say, I think this is an excellent report from the Event Fund, and lots of questions around the good that we get from it, the good that we receive from it for the council and for the region, actually. And thank you for answering all those questions. So I really appreciate that. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, agree with what you said then. Thanks, Luke, for this first go round on this report. I think it shows that there is really useful information here. It also shows that the data space is challenging. And I think, you know, rubbish in, rubbish out would be the message here. If we can put some investment into gathering good data, then we can rely on what it tells us. That if the data is loose, then the conclusions we can draw are equally loose. So, yeah, the report talks about the 2,116.74% net regional benefit against our investment, which is great. And I'm sure that there is significant net regional investment from these events and from all the other events that I hope turn up in next year's report, strategic, the arts events, the sports events, etc., etc. I think what it shows, and it's what we've always known, that Palmy's strength is in our events calendar, that it brings liveliness to the central business district. And I think that means it's a good thing that there's other things going on when events are going on. I don't think that's a bad thing that somebody was here for stock cars and also went to the museum. It shows a remarkable diversity of interests, which should be encouraged. So I don't think we want to be separating those things out. I actually think we do want to be seeing a layering of our offering so that people go away going, I went to Palmerston North for stock cars and it turns out there's a ton of things to do there. That's a good thing. And how we get to that data, I do not know, but I think we're starting to have the right kind of conversations. So thanks to the officers for that.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to say I completely agree with Councillor Bowen, but really my initial reason for talking was to thank Luke and the team for all the wonderful work they do with regards to the events in Palmerston North City. And I've been to many in my time on council, and I've just been so super impressed with everything that that team does. So thank you, Luke. I did think that every time we have an event in Palmerston North City, whether that be the arts, whether that be sport, whether that be a whole range of things, actually, everything, that we do hit whāinga tuarua, which is the goal number 2, a creative and exciting city. And that's one of the benefits, in addition to the economic benefits that the city receives. But it is, you know, one of the outcomes of that is that we're a vibrant city that connects people and where creativity is built into our cityscape. So I'm certainly all for this. And thank you for the report. Tēnā koe, kia ora, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This report is certainly interesting, but it does bring up a few things for me. And in particular, one of the previous speakers mentioned that it shows the net benefit of our investment. And I guess the thing I always think about when we talk about our investment is it's actually the ratepayers' investment. And the net benefit of that investment usually goes to a much smaller selection of our ratepayers than it does to those who actually fund it. So I think there is some usefulness to this sort of information, but when it's used to justify a level of investment that might be out of step with those who are funding it, then I do find it a little bit problematic. So whilst it's interesting and it may be useful, I think we need to be mindful that we don't use it to justify perhaps a level of spend that may not be appropriate given the capacity of those who are funding it.
Right, that's all the comments. Let's look to vote. Thank you. It has passed, 13 votes for and none against. we'll go to the second to last item on our agenda, which is item 20, page 389. Bill. Please introduce who you've got with you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councillors. Bill Carswell, Acting Manager Property, and I'd like to introduce Anna Saunders, who's a Senior Capital Project Officer in the property team. We present the monthly update on Tamakuku. Anna has been the key lead, council lead officer on that, but asked her to comment before perhaps I ask that the report taken as read, then questions to that. Anna.
Kia ora, councillors. I just wanted to quickly provide a short update on some of the numbers on page 392. So since the report was written, we have, I mentioned in the report there was 2 sales we were working on at the time. Those sales have since converted, so now we are sitting at 4 sales, and we have also had an additional settlement with 2 more settlements tomorrow. So we will be sitting at total sold and settled as 25 by the end of this week, which would be revenue of roughly 7.5 mil, excluding GST. But other than that, just take the report as read, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Anna. Right, we've got questions. Councillor Wood to start.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Tim. I promise it won't be as long as last time this item came to us. It's only one question. Just nothing to do with roses, Councillor Bowen. Noting in the report the projected profits from stage 1 versus stage 2, stage 1 is expected to cost 24.8 million with a $15.2 million expense, so we're expecting to make $9.6 million of profit, around 38.7%. That's considerably lower in stage 2, anticipating that of an $11.85 million cost, we'll make $1.95 million profit, or 16.5%. So, you know, almost half of what we were anticipating of stage 1 we'll be making in stage 2. So I'm just wondering, are there particular challenges with stage 2 that lead to it being considerably less profitable with stage 1, or is it simply it's a smaller scale, so it is a smaller base to diversify costs over? What's the reasoning?
Mostly the latter. It's a smaller scale, so yeah, lesser, and just weighing up the costs, essentially.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Anna, for your report. Appreciate it a lot. And to follow on from Councillor Wood's question, I was quite interested in the numbers as well. Thanks for that update, Anna. Whilst we've got budgeted amounts in the report of 15.2 for stage 1 and 9.9 for stage 2, totaling $25 million budgeted across the entire development, and correct me if I'm wrong too, do we have any understanding of the cost of sales? Or could we just accept that the cost of sales is the budgeted amount?
The cost of the sales is included in those budgeted costs.
Okay.
So that, you know, includes sales fees and lawyers, etc., all those ongoing.
For sure, all consultants' fees, it's all wrapped up in those
Correct.
budgeted amounts.
Yes, that includes everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Follow on from that, I just noted that 3 of the sections were transacted 2 years ago on the 14th of November. I'm talking about lots 310 and 114. And 2 years later, they still haven't settled. Do we know what's holding those particular 3 sections up?
Those sections were with group builders. This is before I came on board, but at the time, we are allowing renewal of their term. They've been put with builders' terms on the agreements, so they have a certain time to secure a buyer, and and we've been allowing the extension of that as they're getting closer to getting those buyers.
Sure, for example, the 12-month build contract.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so you can extend that out for them just to help the process.
Usually by about 3 months, and we wait on progress and determine whether, yeah.
For sure. Last question, Anna, and it just speaks to whether or not we accept that sections are sold but they haven't yet settled as sold sections, whereas sections that have sold and have settled, we can accept the money's in our bank account, they are sold, whereas the rest are conditional or still conditional on settlement. That'd be fair. So to date, therefore, as you've mentioned, there are 25 settled sales across the entire development to date.
Correct, yes.
With a number of...
As of tomorrow, 2 more going through, but yes, correct.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. I'm just interested to know what the forecast revenue is for sales for this current financial year and how we're tracking for that. Might be a Scott question.
We don't have the numbers in my head at the moment, but we're forecast to continue doing 2 sales per month, depending on the value of the sections. Yeah, if it was 300, then 600 per month, times 12. Yeah. For the year. If that answers the question. No?
Have we got anything more specific than that? So are we talking 77? Oh. So we're
Sorry,
talking
Councillor,
7
can't
million.
hear.
Like, I'm just trying to understand what the revenue. I don't know if Scott's got that information, but what the total revenue is that is our assumption for the year. Does it,
Sorry, can
They might have to come back to you if they don't know it.
Through the chair. So if it's, I'll do the maths, see if I got it right. 600 a month, so there's 2 sections per month for the remainder of the year. There's 7 months left in the year. It's about 4.2 mil by year end.
and how are we tracking to that? So is that about 7 million over the year? Is it that we're hoping to get?
Yeah, through the chair, perhaps I can just help the team out as well. I think your question was what we're forecasting. So we're forecasting to sell 2 per month. So how we're tracking so far, you've just seen another 2 just sold. Sounds like the team is tracking okay, but again, it's market driven. So we're making some assumptions about what the forecasts actually might look like, and that'll come back up in future reports.
Oh, sorry. What my question? Sorry if I wasn't clear enough. What I'm talking about is our annual budget. What have we budgeted? What is the annual budget revenue assumption for this? And how we're tracking to that. I guess that's what I mean for the current financial year, is our annual budget revenue. But I can take it offline if that's...
You need to come back to us.
I'm happy to come back. I just...
Yeah, we'll just take that on notice, Madam Chair, and come back to you on that.
They'll come back.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just interested to know why lot 31 sold for 5k less than its listed price, and it's the only one that has. What's the reasoning there, please?
Fortunately, this sale happened before we came on board to the project, so I don't have that information right now, but I could get that for you.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks,
from
Anna.
councillors. Yeah.
Right. There's no further questions. So we'll look to move the recommendation. Thank you very much. We'll look to move the recommendation that the committee receive the memorandum titled Tamakuku Terrace 6 monthly update presented to the Economic Growth Committee on the 20th of November 2024. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Wood. Have we got any comment? Everyone's getting very tired. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a short comment, and perhaps to try and wrap it up so we can get a bit of a clearer picture. Based on the report, we can see that there's $25 million budgeted for the subdivision, expecting a revenue of $36 million so it's roughly a 30% return on the investment. If the chief executive numbers are right, and we're tracking at 2 sales a month, we're probably looking at in another 5 years to completely sell out the subdivision. Just if that's useful. Kia ora.
Thank you, councillor. Okay, right. Okay, I think we'll now go to vote. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for the report. We really appreciated that. We'll go to vote. That's passed, 12 votes for and none against, and thank you for that. And we'll now go to the work schedule on page 419, and I'll look to the General Manager for any update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No specific comments, other than that the next meeting's not till the 9th of April next year, so plenty of time to schedule a workshop on parking.
Has anybody got any questions? Has anybody got any questions? Any questions? No? Okay. We'll look to move the work schedule. I'll move it, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Thank you, and we'll look to vote. Thank you. It's finished with 11 votes all and no one against. I'd like to now close.
Whoever voted, I'll put you in.
I'll now close the meeting with a karakia from Councillor Fitzgerald. Thank you.
Lovely to be at the end of the day. Kia ora tātou. Kia puta ki te whaiau, ki te ao marama, whakamaua kia tīna, haumie, huie, tāhie. Kia ora.
Thank you, everyone.
And that was just a committee meeting.
I know, get a sore back.
We've had shorter council meetings than we've had committee meetings.